After looking at the worst adapted heroes and villains in Fox's shared X-Men universe, we've seen some adaptations so abominable they basically killed the entire X-Men franchise. But on the best adapted heroes list, we saw some fairly valiant attempts at bringing what fans love about the X-Men to life on the screen. But what about the other side? The best adapted Fox X-Men villains. Many of you have commented that a best villains list in this universe will be straight up impossible. But after going through all of the villains adapted into these movies and subjecting them to the 3Cs system, I can confidently tell you that actually, when you look closely at them, you're basically still right. Which is why this ranking list will have to be shorter than previous ones. So I don't have to sit here and try to convince you that Blob is just close enough to deserve to be on a best adaptations list. But what are these astonishing and uncanny 3Cs? Well, they are costume, character, and continuity. Costume rates a character's outfit or costume, their overall look, and their superficial physical characteristics. Character rates their personality, their relationships with others, and their powers or abilities. And continuity rates their origin story, their iconic moments, and their overall place in the world, universe, or timeline. So finally, here it is. One more round, Fox. Let's go. The top 10 best adapted Fox X-Men villains. But first, disclaimer, a character's placement on this list is not me saying they're a good or bad character, yada yada yada. It's only how well or poorly they've been adapted in relation to other characters in the universe, blah 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 blah. You got it? I always say it, and yet some genius will still yell at me in the comments about that crap. Anyways, now starting the list with the 10th best adapted villain in the entirety of Fox's X-Men franchise, Dark Phoenix. Oh god, that doesn't bode well. In both the comics and movies, the Phoenix Force is an ancient cosmic entity that likely predates the universe. It is unfathomably powerful, able to create and destroy matter, and has destroyed entire planets with little effort. Both are masses of energy that sometimes take on a bird-like shape. Both versions eventually come to Earth and bond to the powerful psychic mutant Jean Grey, greatly increasing her powers. In the comics, this was while Jean was piloting the X-Men from a space station back to Earth in a ship that lacked proper shielding in its cockpit, under the deadly effects of a solar flare. In desperation, she psychically called out and was heard by the Phoenix Force, which bonded its energies to her own. Though it was later retconned that it had actually created an exact duplicate of her, while the real Jean was left to heal from her injuries. With Jean saving her teammates and rising from the water she'd seemingly died in. Reborn as the Phoenix, her psychic abilities increased to near godlike levels. In the revised timeline of the movies, the Phoenix Force traveled the cosmos, destroying everything it came into contact with, before eventually, I assume, being drawn to the newly awakened power of Jean Grey. Jean then encounters it in space, while her and the X-Men try to save the crew of a space shuttle it had damaged. She then draws the Force into herself to stop it from killing the remaining astronauts and the X-Men. In the original movie timeline, instead we learn that to help Jean control her abilities at a young age, Professor Xavier helped her suppress them and sealed off a section of her mind, somewhat similar to what he'd done to help her when she was young in the comics. In the movie version, her suppressed near-limitless power, as well as Jean's own suppressed thoughts and emotions, manifests as an entirely separate personality, and while trying to save the rest of her team from incoming waters, Jean taps into those suppressed abilities, causing the Phoenix persona to fully manifest, later re-emerging from the water she'd seemingly died in. In the comic version, Mastermind, with help from Emma Frost, uses his illusions to manipulate Jean Grey in order to gain her new power for himself and increase his rank in the Hellfire Club, implanting false visions of past lives into her mind in order to corrupt Jean Grey into the Hellfire Club's Black Queen. After shaking his illusions, the Phoenix is enraged and uses her powers to drive him mad, now calling herself the Dark Phoenix. She flies into space and consumes the energy of a star, leading to the destruction of a nearby planet and the deaths of billions. In X-Men Dark Phoenix, the Phoenix Force had destroyed that planet before merging with Jean, leading to its inhabitants, the Dabari, following it in an effort to steal its power for themselves. Despite absorbing all that cosmic energy, Jean initially seems fine, but when the Phoenix Force begins to break down the psychic barriers in her mind, increasing her power and revealing repressed memories to her, Jean's mind begins to fracture, causing her to lose control of her powers and attack her teammates. Later, the Dabari track her down and do something, see the worst adapted villains list for that nonsensical breakdown, to further manipulate her mind in an effort to convince her to give her powers to them. In X-Men The Last Stand, after rising from the lake as the Phoenix, Jean is impulsively insane, going from kissing Scott one moment to killing him the next, and lashing out and escaping the X-Mansion after being recovered. Magneto tries to manipulate her towards his own goals of mutant supremacy, and Xavier tries to convince her to allow him to re-establish the barriers that kept the Phoenix persona at bay. Her dark side wins out, causing her to kill Xavier and follow Magneto, until her own destructive impulses grow too uncontrollable even for Magneto, and she lashes out, threatening to destroy the entire world. All versions involve Jean being manipulated by those who wish to harness her power for themselves. All versions lash out against her former friends, and all versions succumb to suppressed thoughts and feelings as her power grows. Neither of the movie versions bothered to wear anything even close to the awesome Dark Phoenix outfit, with the original version wearing some kind of weird red dress thing to allude to the red of her costume, I guess, which the revised timeline didn't even have the decency to bother trying to do, as she just wears the exciting costume of regular clothes. So that's where we're starting on a Best Adapted list. Let that give you a sense of how Fox adapted villains overall. But now, up to 9, we have Apocalypse. In-Sub-Nur is a mutant that was born 5,000 years ago in ancient Egypt. Both versions had gray skin and blue lips, though in the movies he lacks the distinctive other details of Apocalypse's face, and likely due to changing bodies, over time he gets more of a bluish skin, cause that's what this movie needed, more blue character. In comics he was abandoned as a child due to his appearance, but was later found by a tribe that believed survival of the fittest was the rule of life, and with his emerging mutant abilities he became the strongest of that tribe, and then the last surviving member after his tribe was slaughtered by men serving the pharaoh Ramatut. In his quest for revenge, Nur's mutant ability fully manifested, granting him immortality and the ability to control the structure of his body on an atomic level, allowing him to transform his body and change shape, alter his size, regenerate, and pretty much whatever else he can imagine. In his travels around the world, he learns greater mastery over his abilities and augmented his body with celestial technology to increase his power to even greater levels, allowing him to absorb, manipulate, and project energies, teleport, manipulate matter, create force fields, gave him levels of telepathy, telekinesis, flight, and massively increased levels of strength, speed, durability, agility, and more. He eventually decides to enter a state of suspended animation, to awaken again in the future when mutants become more common in the population, so he can use their power to bring his vision of the world to reality. In the movies, we don't have very many details about his past or his rise to power, though like the comics, he does increase his abilities over time. His mutant power and the way he does this is completely different. Movie In-Sub-Nur has the power to transfer his essence, or consciousness, or soul, or something, from his body into another's. Through this process, he is kinda, technically, immortal, as long as he can transfer to a new host body. And when doing so, he gains the abilities of that body, as well as all abilities he's gained by doing so in the past, including mutant abilities. And though he has transferred bodies in the comics before, this is not his main power or a big part of the character, and he does not need to do it to survive. In the past of the movies, we see that he has some form of telekinesis, as we see him building the pyramids with it, and through the ages he's gained the ability to project force fields, teleport, manipulate and affect matter, superhuman strength and durability, enhanced senses, and a whole cocktail of other powers that he'll use once to great effect, and then completely forget he has later on. He uses his abilities to increase the power of mutants who follow him, having a constantly shifting group of 4 horsemen who follow him through the ages. Like the comic version, the movie version seeks to cull the weak and empower the strong, though instead of waiting for the modern day by choice, the movie version is betrayed by his followers and trapped in a tomb for thousands of years before being released in the modern day. In the comics, though it's been retconned, so he did have them in the past, the original 4 horsemen were individuals Apocalypse chose, manipulated, and massively empowered to serve as his loyal henchmen as he continues his tests and experiments in the modern day. Though instead of just kinda touching them and then they get vaguely more powerful like in the movies, in the comics he subjects them to complicated processes combining all of his abilities and technology to completely remake them in his image, including their own personalities. In the movies, he is inadvertently awakened in the modern day of the 80s. He sees the world as having become weak in his absence and begins searching for horsemen to begin his plans to destroy and recreate the world in his image. Though both versions believe the strong should rule over the weak, the movie version also has immense delusions of grandeur. He's not an absolute Darwinist ideological zealot. He's just a megalomaniac who sees himself as a literal god, with his greatest desire being world domination. In the comics, he's much more dispassionate about ruling the world, and sees it more as the natural order, due to him being the strongest, as well as a way to enforce his beliefs on mutants and human alike, eradicating the weak and forcing the strong to fight and become stronger. Both versions are powerful enough to easily fight the combined might of the X-Men. Both versions wear armor that greatly increases their strength, with the comic version having many of his powers come from that armor, though the movie version never explained what this armor was or where it comes from. Superficially, the biggest difference is his size. In the comics, he's usually portrayed as much taller and more muscular than the average person, partially due to his ability to control his size, but also because he's just super jacked, giving him an incredibly imposing presence when facing the X-Men. But the movie just had him be pretty much average height, and instead of his armor making him look tall and imposing, it makes him look like a stooped-over old man most of the time. Now up to 8, we come to Emma Frost. In the comics and movies, Emma Frost is a mutant telepath who uses her powers and looks to manipulate those around her while serving in the Hellfire Club alongside Sebastian Shaw. In the movies, the Hellfire Club does use the promise of pleasure to secure power, but that's about where the similarities end. While in the comics, she serves in a leadership role alongside Shaw's and is incredibly ambitious and independent. In the movies, she seems to serve as his right hand and appears to be quite subservient and docile. Both versions put great care into their appearance and mannerisms, wearing heavy makeup and incredibly revealing, often white outfits that play into the Hellfire Club's aesthetic of forbidden pleasure and classy debauchery. Though while the comic version dresses more theatrical and stylish, often wearing a complex lingerie-type outfit, the movie version just basically wears a normal bra and a skirt. And when not acting in a seductive role in the Hellfire Club, she basically just wears white jumpsuits. Though while in that main costume, the movie version does wear the comic one's iconic white cape. Both put a lot of work into how others perceive her, trying to present herself as visually appealing as possible while also carrying an air of haughty upper-class sophistication and elegance in the way she moves and talks. In the comics, Emma was initially portrayed as a lot more cunning, cold, and cruel, but over time we see that much of this is a front and she actually cares deeply for others, especially mutants, showing herself to be a teacher at heart, opening up a school of her own similar to Xavier's and training a group of young mutants she calls the Hellions to assist her in gaining more power within the club, with her connection to and then loss of many of the Hellions later on being one of the catalysts towards her changing her ways. In the movies, they only do the cold element of her personality, showing basically no emotion whatsoever and giving us no real sense of her personality outside of just constantly looking bored and working for Shaw. She initially seems loyal to Shaw and his goal of wiping out humanity to help mutants take control of the world, though is soon after willing to happily join under the man who had killed Shaw, showing us that she's just 100% dedicated to the goal of mutant superiority, or just follows whoever she sees as the strongest, or she's just bored. In the comics, she tried to recruit Kitty Pryde for her own purposes, and was somewhat involved in Jean Grey's corruption into the Black Queen/Dark Phoenix. However, in the movies, she has no connection to and never met either of these characters, with her role with Jean kind of influencing Vux look in Dark Phoenix. Though at the time the movie was made, she was well known for both her power of telepathy as well as her secondary mutation to turn her body into diamond. During the time that she was a villain in the Hellfire Club in comics, she only had her mental abilities, only gaining her diamond form years later as a secondary mutation. And while the previous version of Emma in the movies did an awful job of portraying her diamond form, this version does an even worse job somehow. In the comics, her skin just turns to diamond. It's not complicated. But in this movie, her body and her clothes turn into a jagged, transparent diamond substance, somehow covering her skirt and top, but making them seem to disappear as well. It's very ugly, and I do not know why you'd sign off on that. And while the comic one went on to break free from her villainous ways, going on to become a high-ranking member of the X-Men and the Xavier Institute, and eventually fell in love with Scott Summers, the movie version was killed off-screen between movies because they completely forgot to make her a character, so most people forgot she was even in the movie. And though the previous movie version was around Scott Summers' age, had they not killed this version off, she would have been in like her 60s by the time of the original movie, so unless that's your specific kink. And now at 7 we have Ajax. In both the comics and movies, Ajax is a member of a group called the Workshop, a secret organization that would perform inhuman experiments. Both organizations have ties to Weapon X. In the comics, it was supposed to be a place for failed Weapon X super soldiers to be treated and recover, such as Wade Wilson when the implanted healing factor he'd been given began to stop working, causing his cancer to return. But instead of receiving care, patients were subjected to inhuman tortures for experimental purposes. In the movies, the organization reaches out to the terminally ill, offering them the hope of curing their conditions, but secretly performing experiments to torture their bodies with extreme stresses, in the attempt to activate potentially dormant X genes so that they can sell superpowered individuals to the highest bidder. In both versions, Ajax is a psychopathic and sadistic high-ranking member of the organization, in the comics working under Dr. Killebrew, in the movies seemingly running the workshop, with both being completely callous towards the suffering he oversaw and taking a delight in the pain he helped to cause them. Both versions were experimented on himself, in the comics undergoing a procedure to alter his nerve endings so he wouldn't feel most forms of pain, as well as to have his strength, speed, durability, and other abilities enhanced to superhuman levels. In the movie, he underwent the same procedure as the other patients, activating his dormant X gene and giving him similar abilities minus the enhanced speed. In both versions, while aiding in tortures for Deadpool, he gained an intense dislike of Wade Wilson, enduring constant taunts and seemingly unable to break his spirit, especially infuriated when Wade learns and keeps repeating his real name, Francis, leading to both versions orchestrating events to seemingly have Wade killed. Later, both versions fought Wade during his escape, in the comics leading to Wade seemingly killing Ajax, in the movies to Ajax seemingly killing Wade. In the movies, Ajax continued his business, later being hunted down and killed by Wade in his Deadpool persona. In the comics, Ajax reappeared years later to get revenge on Deadpool, but was eventually killed. In the movies, he wears a regular combat-style outfit with minor body armor. In the comics, he initially wears a black outfit with an A on it, but later wears a full-body metallic armor and helmet. Now up to 6 with Bolivar Trask. In both comics and movies, Bolivar Trask is a brilliant scientist who believes that due to their superior abilities and ever-growing numbers, mutants will inevitably wipe out humanity and take over the Earth. He runs Trask Industries and dedicates his resources and genius to creating robotic Sentinels that can hunt down and capture or eliminate mutants. Both versions dress professionally and have well-groomed facial hair. The main difference visually is that while the comic version is of average height, the movie version has dwarfism and is therefore much shorter. While they both created the Sentinels and have similar philosophies on mutants, virtually every other detail around them is quite different. In the comics, Trask first appeared publishing articles and appearing on TV talking about the mutant problem. Professor Xavier took part in a televised debate with Trask, arguing that mutants and humans were more alike than they were different and are not inherently threatening. Trask then revealed his Sentinels to the world, but almost immediately they rebelled against humans as well as mutants, kidnapped Trask, and forced him to build more Sentinels so that they could take over the world. While witnessing the X-Men and Sentinels fighting, Trask learns that there are mutants willing to use their abilities to protect humanity, and aids the X-Men in destroying the Sentinels, sacrificing his life to do so. In the movies, Trask is portrayed as much more malicious, using his research to have mutants kidnapped, experimented on, killed, and harvested for further research. He works to convince powerful world leaders to fund his Sentinel program, but due to the relative lack of awareness of mutants, he fails and is soon after killed by Mystique in revenge for killing her allies in his experiments, with his murder making him a martyr for humanity, and leading to the implementation of the Sentinel program to protect the world from dangerous mutants. After the X-Men travel back in time, they prevent his assassination, and Trask is arrested by the United States government when it is learned that he was working with foreign powers to get funding for his program. While the comic version is specifically scared of what mutants can do, the movie version seems scientifically fascinated by them, being particularly interested in what they say about evolution, which is the major difference that leads to the comic version being moved by their potential heroism, while the movie version is coldly unwavering. One of the major differences, assumedly, since we never see it in the movies, is that in the comic version, it's later ironically revealed that he had mutant children himself, adding another layer to Trask's story. So, we're finally getting some that are at least kind of similar, which is good, because we're now at the top 5 most well-adapted Fox X-Men villains, starting with, on a related note, the Sentinels. As I basically literally just said, the Sentinels are robots created by Dr. Bolivar Trask to hunt and capture or exterminate mutants. In both the comics and movies, they were created due to worries that the incredible powers in a rising mutant population would eventually lead to the extinction of the human race. Both versions were first unveiled to the world on live television. In the comics, this was during a televised debate between their creator, Bolivar Trask, and a mutant rights advocate, Charles Xavier. In the movies, they were unveiled to the world in front of the White House to reassure humanity after the existence of mutants had become known. In comics, there had been many different versions of the Sentinels created through the years, with various capabilities and looks, as there also have been in the movies. The original comic Sentinels had a red and blue color scheme. The movie takes inspiration from the more well-known Mark II onward Sentinel program, and so the movie's Mark I Sentinels are mostly purple, though they ditch the pink color of the arms and legs in the comics and replace it with a dark metallic silver, making them look somewhat similar to a much later model of piloted Sentinel, though I think that's just a coincidence. While the comic Sentinels have most of their mechanical parts covered, the movie Sentinels are very strictly inhuman and robotic, with the vents on their chests enlarged to show most of their body is relatively hollow, and their mechanical limbs on full display. And while they do have similar facial shapes, including the squarish nose and cheekbones, glowing eyes, and slit-lined mouth, the comic versions have a skin-like coloring, while the movie ones have a dark synthetic color, with riot officer-like facial helmets. Those Sentinels are known now for being quite large, towering over mutants while they hunt for them. The original ones in comics were only about twice as tall as a human, with the movie versions being closer to that size, standing maybe about 3.5 times as tall as a standard human. Though in the movie's original timeline, decades after they were first introduced, we see the X-Men training against a hologram of a Sentinel in a Danger Room simulation, with it being much bigger and closer to the size of their modern portrayals. This version lacks the color of either the comics or original movie versions, being one solid grayish tone, though there are elements of the head that are closer to the comics, including the helmeted shape and the grooves of the forehead. While the movie versions are specifically programmed to never harm a human and are portrayed as mindless machines, similar to later marks in the comics, the original comic versions were much more intelligent and surmised that due to their superiority, the best way to protect humans was to take over all of humanity. Though later models had this increased level of intelligence and autonomy removed to focus specifically on hunting mutants. In the comics, the Sentinels are usually portrayed as being built by Master Mold, a gigantic machine designed to create an army of Sentinels. In the movies, the initial Sentinels were man-made, and we have no reference to a Master Mold. Though, at the numbers they're seen decades later, I think it's likely there is some greater machine creating them, but we have no evidence for this. And to those of you typing it up quick, I don't usually take spin-off media as canon, since movies will usually ignore anything that happens in them anyways. In both continuities, after the assassination of a prominent anti-mutant spokesman, production of Sentinels is heavily increased to contend with concerns about the increased number of mutants and the dangers their powers could pose, with both then leading to dystopian futures where Sentinels rule over both human and mutant. hunting mutant as well as human supporters and exterminating them or placing them in camps. The Sentinels in the movie's future look very different than the ones in the comics did, with the movie versions being much more advanced, and all having a sleek dark gray design instead of the classic Sentinel colors seen in the storyline that it's based on. In the comics, the Sentinels are able to project blasts of energy from their hands and chest. While the initial movie ones mainly used bullets, the future ones are able to project powerful energy blasts from their heads. In all versions, the Sentinels are programmed specifically to track down mutants, having scanning technology that allows them to differentiate targets with an X gene within them, and all versions are capable of flight. While not part of the standard model's abilities, there have been Sentinels able to adapt and counteract the powers and abilities of those they fight, similar to how the future ones use harvested mutant DNA to adapt against and counter mutant abilities. And while the Sentinels in the comics often talk, usually to give commands and order mutants to surrender, the ones seen in the movies are completely silent machines. So while a lot of the details are different, their basic origin, elements of their look, and role of importance in the story, and the threat they pose to both humans and mutants is pretty much the same. But now we go up to 4 with Demon Bear. My god, something from New Mutants made it into the top 5. In both versions, the Demon Bear is a mysterious entity that's haunted Daniel Moonstar's life since childhood, with it seemingly being responsible for the death of her parents when she was young, and continues to haunt her subconscious and nightmares ever since, growing more and more powerful as it seemingly feeds on her ever-increasing fear of it. In the comics, it is implied to be a literal entity, while in the movies it is implied to be more of a subconscious manifestation of her ability to bring illusions of people's deepest emotions and fears to life, with the bear being a manifestation of her own fears and darkness in childhood, bringing destruction to her reservation and causing the death of her parents. With that repressed horror growing more and more powerful over time, and due to her inability to control her own abilities, became more and more than she could withhold. In the comics, it is relatively mysterious, but seems to be an entity that has bonded itself to Dani to feed off of her negative emotions, growing stronger over time, until she eventually called it out to face it herself, where it was able to at first defeat and severely injure her. Though still not fully explained, we know that it is connected to another dimensional realm known as the Badlands, and is likely related in some way to Native American folklore, as Warpath encounters a similar entity later on that is connected to the desecrated bodies of his Apache tribe, as well as it being said that it was connected to an ancient being known as the Adversary, who has connections to the Cheyenne. Whatever it is, both versions grow in power until it threatens Dani and those she cares for, until the New Mutants come together to finally defeat it. In the movies, Dani overcomes her traumas after forming a close bond with her new friends, and is able to banish the manifestation from reality. In the comics, after a long fight with the New Mutants, it is eventually destroyed by Magic's soul sword, with Dani's parents then appearing alive from within it, implying that instead of being killed by it, they had somehow been turned into it for reasons that to this day have only been loosely alluded to. Despite the differences, both versions are giant, dark, monstrous, psychic bear entities with glowing red eyes that haunt Dani Moonstone's life and nightmares before being defeated by the New Mutants. For Fox's standards, that is an amazing adaptation. Alright, now entering the top 3 most well-adapted Fox X-Men villains, starting with the Juggernaut. While we touched upon the Last Stand Juggernaut in a previous video, here we specifically have the version seen in Deadpool 2. The Juggernaut is Kane Marko, Charles Xavier's stepbrother. In the comics, Kane's father was cruel to him and favored Xavier, creating a lifelong resentment. In the movies, we don't know anything about Charles and Kane's upbringing. All we know is that Charles states he has a stepfather, and Marko clearly has some resentment when referencing his wheelchair-bound stepbrother who can read minds. In the comics, while serving in the army, Kane stumbled upon an ancient lost temple and found the Crimson Gem as Sideric, read out the nearby inscription, and was turned into a human Juggernaut, gaining insane levels of strength, nigh invulnerability, and the ability to basically instantly heal from any injury he does get. He becomes virtually unstoppable when he gains momentum. He does not need to eat or sleep and has virtually infinite stamina, with the Gem of Sideric turning him into one of the most powerful forces on the entire planet and beyond. In X-Men The Last Stand, Juggernaut is explicitly stated to be a mutant, but in Deadpool 2, despite being contained in a mutant prison, he does not have the same power inhibitor collar everyone else is wearing, instead being contained by some kind of complex magnetic restraining system, implying that his origin may be closer to the comics. There's some debate as to whether the Juggernaut scene in Deadpool 2 is the same one as The Last Stand, and Deadpool doesn't care too much about continuity anyways. My personal theory, with no basis whatsoever, is that both Juggernauts are the same person, and both are mutants. But in the revised timeline, Kane Marko found the Crystal Gem of Sideric, and it further magically empowered him, which is the reason for the massive increase in his size. But that's speculation, and there is no evidence for that in the movie. In both the comics and movies, though, the helmet he wears protects him from his biggest weakness, which is psychic attacks. In the comics, he's friends with Black Tom Cassidy, who sadly was killed in a hate crime by a racist from the future only moments before they would have met up as seen later. with Juggernaut instead forming an unlikely friendship with Fire Fist, who, as we've already covered, is totally different and definitely is not a thing in comics. In both versions, despite his immense power, Juggernaut is not a world-dominating villain, instead basically just using his power to do whatever the hell he wants, whether that's criminal acts of self-interest or even sometimes heroic acts during times he's feeling nicer. And we see both in the movie, as he is incarcerated for crimes and immediately rips Deadpool in half upon escaping, and he teams up with Fire Fist to go take on what he's been told is an orphanage where children are being abused, knowing nothing about the dark future Deadpool is trying to avoid by stopping Rusty from committing his first murder. This version is portrayed stronger than the X3 version, able to easily rip Deadpool in half, but he's still not nearly as strong as he is in the comics, as he's able to be easily held at bay by Colossus alone and being taken out by an electric cable up his ass, which I don't think has ever been tested in the comics, though feel free to correct me if I'm not thinking of something. Though we see later in the movie that he was just momentarily incapacitated and he gets up and walks off. Instead of wearing his costume, the movie version only wears his prison jumpsuit, though does later rip off his sleeves to show off his guns as he does in the comics. And he does have his iconic dome-shaped helmet. In the comics, his whole costume is usually a reddish color to match the gem that empowers him, though from time to time he has wore a darker colored costume as well, somewhat similar to the helmet he has in the movie. And while most large characters will never be portrayed as cartoonishly large as they can be in comics, Deadpool 2's Juggernaut is pretty close, towering over everyone, with a fist bigger than Deadpool's entire head. So there will always be many nitpicks with characters, but due to actually doing a version of his distinct helmet, his reference to his stepbrother, his basic personality, and his level of importance as a villain as shown through his theme song in the movie, this version is a huge improvement for fans over the previous version. And their attempts to bring the character to life is very, very appreciated and earns him a spot in the top 3. However, this version doesn't run through a single frickin' wall in the entire movie, so 0 out of 10, no points. Now up to 2 we have Senator Robert Kelly. While the X-Men on the page and on screen fight mutants, monsters, robots, time travelers, aliens, and every third imaginable, their biggest enemy is not overt evils, but the fears and prejudices of the general public for mutants and the dangers their abilities can pose to the public, with characters like Robert Kelly providing a pretty good exploration of those fears in both the comics and the movies. Both versions serve in the U.S. Senate. In the comics, he is a representative from Massachusetts, and while they never explicitly state it, we can see in the background that he likely serves Kentucky in the movies. Both versions are normal-looking older men with graying hair and glasses who wear suits. Both versions are very vocal about the threat the growing number of mutants in society pose to the safety and security of the United States. Both versions propose a bill that will force mutants to reveal themselves to the government so their powers and locations can be documented and monitored. In the comics, this is the Mutant Control Act. In the movies, it is the Mutant Registration Act. In the comics, he is also a supporter of a renewed Sentinel program, but in the movies, since Sentinels were not introduced in the continuity yet, we don't know if there's any connection. Both versions are soon targeted by the Brotherhood due to basically being the spokesperson for human rights. In the comics, this was a version of the Brotherhood led by Mystique, who tried to assassinate him in broad daylight, which would have caused a further fear of mutants that would lead to a dystopian future ruled over by Sentinels. This entire storyline was later appropriated to replace Kelly with Bolivar Trask. The movie version was chosen by the Brotherhood to be the first test subject of a machine that would transform humans into mutants, with Kelly chosen as its test subject both as revenge for his comments about mutants as well as to turn the greatest critic of mutants into one himself. Though initially successful, giving Kelly bizarre aquatic abilities, it later proved unstable, with his DNA breaking down at a cellular level, turning him into a puddle of water. Though just before he dies, he does begin to see mutants differently after receiving selfless help from the X-Men. In the comics, he does not become a mutant or get turned into a puddle of water, but his beliefs on mutants do begin to change after being saved and helped by the X-Men many times, with many believing that he's turned traitor against humanity due to his shifting views, eventually leading to his death. Both versions offer rationalistic and persuasive arguments against mutants, focusing on the dangers their powers pose instead of just overt bigotry. So besides his death and specific elements of the story, Kelly shares a lot in common, from superficial details to what he represents in the universe. The one very strange piece of continuity I haven't referenced is that according to a promotional special that came out before the release of the first movie, Kelly has a mutant daughter himself, whose mutation manifests in front of a crowd of people in broad daylight, which is not only not a thing in the comics, but is seemingly not actually canon in the movies, as it's never referenced in any way whatsoever. Alright, here we are. The number 1 most well-adapted Fox X-Men villain is exactly who you thought it was when you started this video. Pyro. In the comics, Pyro is a teen at the Xavier Institute who hangs out with Bobby and Rogue before eventually joining the... No, just kidding. None of that is true. Of course it's Magneto. Erich Lenscher was a young boy in Germany in the 40s who was captured by the Nazis along with his family and shipped to the Auschwitz concentration camp. And then in the initial comics and movies, he was branded with the number 214782. In recent comics, his name has been retconned to being Max Eisenhart, with Eric Lenscher being an identity he took on much later. But at the time of the movies, Eric was his name, and a much better name for Magneto than frickin' Max, in my opinion. In the movies, his powers began manifesting while being separated from his parents, leading to him being taken aside by Sebastian Shaw, who killed his mother in front of him to reactivate those powers for study. In the comics, while there were moments here and there where they first sparked up, they didn't seriously manifest until later on, with him and Shaw not sharing his connection and his mother not being killed in front of him. Though there are stories that show that Mr. Sinister was working at the camp in a somewhat similar role. Both versions were eventually freed from the camps, with the comic version settling down with the woman he loved and having a child, though tragedy followed when his child was killed and his wife went missing, leading to him searching the world for her, only to learn that she had died. And though we don't know much about what happened to the movie version in this time period, both versions eventually used their abilities to track down escaped Nazi war criminals and eventually met and began a friendship with another mutant named Charles Xavier. In the comics, they met while in Israel. Though friends, they disagreed greatly when it came to the topic of mutant-human relations, with Xavier believing that coexistence was possible, while Eric believed due to his own experiences that peace between the two groups was just unfeasible. In the movies, they met while both tracking down Sebastian Shaw. Though they did team up against a villain in the comics, it was Baron Strucker instead of Shaw. And in the movies, Magneto was a part of Xavier's formation of the original first class of X-Men, before later fighting over ideological differences and going their own ways. In the comics, Magneto was not involved with the creation of the X-Men and parted ways with Xavier years before that. And while Magneto was not responsible for paralyzing Xavier in the comics as he does in the movies, in the alternate Ultimate Marvel universe, he was, though purposefully instead of inadvertently. And though both men still hold a respect and friendship for each other, they became mortal enemies, each led by their unyielding ideological beliefs, with Eric vehemently believing that humanity will persecute and kill mutants in exactly the same way that they had his own people only a few decades earlier, and that in order to ensure mutant survival, that it was necessary for mutants to use their powers to take over the world for themselves. Both versions soon after recreate himself into the mutant terrorist villain Magneto, recruiting similarly minded mutants, in the comics into the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, with the movies ditching the whole evil part and just going by the Brotherhood. Though in the movies he has a close relationship with Mystique, in the comics at the time of the initial movie they weren't really connected. But in the original movie, we do see longtime Brotherhood member Toad as a member, with Magneto sharing a similar disparaging and condescending relationship with him, though not to the extremely abusive and cruel levels we see in the early comics. And both versions eventually go on to establish the mutant nation of Genosha. While most of the X-Men heroes and villains barely wear costumes, Magneto has a full-on cape and uniform as well as a helmet, making him immune to his mind-reading and thought control abilities. In his first chronological appearance and costume in the movies, the cut and color are about as accurate as we've ever gotten out of a costume in the franchise, though it is honestly a little awkward and ill-fitting. Though instead of tweaking it up a bit to make it look cooler on the actor, they basically immediately ditch it. Though across all appearances, he maintains the cape and the helmet, as well as various amounts of purple and red, making him look much more like a comic character than pretty much anyone in these movies. Both versions' mutant power makes him one of the most powerful and dangerous mutants in the world. He is known as the Master of Magnetism, able to control and manipulate nearly all forms of metal, as well as to create force fields of magnetic energy and even reverse the planet's magnetic poles, making him a potentially world-ending threat. Though in the comics, this ability is usually portrayed as even more powerful, with him able to manipulate and bend magnetic fields in ways the movie version has not, such as to project magnetic rays or create powerful electromagnetic pulses. Both versions have very complex moralities, sometimes spurned by his past to become the very thing he hates most, seeing himself and mutants as the superior species and humanity as a blight that must be wiped out. Instead of being a defender of his people, he becomes an oppressor of others. In the movies, even willing to kill all of humanity when he learns of Stryker's plan to wipe out all mutants. Despite this, sometimes he is moved to periods of heroism and pacifism, whether due to reformation or sharing a common enemy, working alongside Xavier as we see in the opening of Last Stand or ending of the Wolverine, or when we see him settle down with a human woman for a time at the beginning of Apocalypse. Both versions also had children he did not know about, and then meets years later, specifically Quicksilver. In the comics, the son of Magda, the woman he'd settled down with after escaping the concentration camp, who'd given birth to him unknown to Magneto before she died. In the movies, he was the son of a woman we know very little about who seemed to know about Magneto's abilities but did not stay in touch, and is just a suburban housewife living in America, apparently. In the comics, he has other children, specifically Quicksilver's twin sister Scarlet Witch, as well as Polaris. While most heroes and villains in the Fox X-Men universe are often barely even comparable to their comic source material, Magneto's backstory that drives his ideology, his costume powers, personality, wavering morality, connection to Xavier, and beliefs about human and mutant kind, as well as his role as the leader of the Brotherhood and the X-Men's primary villain, and his somewhat hypocritical beliefs of mutant superiority, all make him one of the most recognizable villain adaptations in all of superhero media. So overall, despite some fairly drastic differences in the character's backstory and relationships, while many of these villains were done wrong, Magneto was right. And there we go. I planned to make this a top 20 or 15 list at least, but when I was sitting there writing out like the 6th character in a row who is nothing like the comics as one of the best adaptations, I realized how annoying that would be and gave up. And while usually I can just focus on the ways that they're similar or the ways that they're different in these videos, on this one, for every character, I've got to spend equal time on both because they're pretty much 50-50, making this thing go way longer than I ever planned it to. If you'd like to see some of those guys who got cut at some point, though, let me know. But I'm sure the majority of you are ready to move on from Fox. What universe should I do next? Sony, CW, the DCAU? There's a lot to pick from. Let me know below what you want to see, whether universe, individual movie, show, game, or anything else. Now that we've done the worst and the best of the hero and villain adaptations in Fox, what does this tell us about adaptations? Does it matter how characters are adapted at all? Does adapting them well lead to success, or is there no frickin' difference? Looking at these lists, I certainly have my opinions. What's yours? If you ain't hit that like or bell yet and are still listening, bro, do it, yo! I got lots more of these things to come. If this was your first one of these rankings, there's a whole big-ass list of them you can check through for whatever universe or movies interest you. Alright then, that's all I got. See you all next time for an all-new, all-different video. Until next time, true believers.